This is the Real Footy Podcast. Coming up, it was an Anzac round to remember, capped with 95,000 people at the MCG for, surprise, surprise, a Collingwood come-from-behind win. We'll discuss that, comeback, and the Bombers getting themselves in such a commanding position over 3 quarters. We'll look at the Demons' Van Rooyen-inspired comeback over the Tigers. We'll discuss the latest moves at AFL headquarters and a probable Tasmanian team now, and the Cats' obliteration of Sydney in the grand final rematch. All that and much more right after this. Well, hello and welcome. My name is Michael Gleeson, and joining us this week, Jake Niall and Andrew Wu for this later than normal production of our podcast, bearing in mind the Anzac Day round. And Jake, 95,000 people, a record crowd, and a game befitting the sort of crowd that turned up.
Yeah, I've been to most of those games, the majority of those Anzac Day games, including the first one. And I saw Craig Kelly, who played in the first ones in the room, had a son playing for both teams. And of course, it's the CEO of Collingwood. And he said, look, we just do it. That's the AFL, and the clubs do it a lot better than that first game, which was sort of kind of an accident where 10,000 people were locked out. There was just an incredible turnout. They had no idea who would turn up, and they got nearly 95,000. This eclipsed it. It's now fully packaged. The game has become something that's like, it's generally the biggest crowd of the home and away season most years. And of course, it's a massive television audience, and it's got the last post. And I think all these things were well done. The New Zealand national anthem, I mean, it's something that I would have raised a bit of an eyebrow about being done, but it was actually very well. It was beautifully sung too. Yeah, and the game itself, yes, very memorable. I'm not sure it eclipsed the original draw, but it was an exceptional game, and Collingwood again came from the clouds as they did a number of times last year. Yeah,
well, we had that sense of inevitability about it that last quarter because you knew last year, no one, even Essendon, seemed to know, it would be burdened by the knowledge of what Collingwood had done last year as that last quarter unfolded.
Oh, it seemed like watching Collingwood Carlton all over again that last quarter. As soon as they got that first goal, you could just feel it coming. The crowd came alive, and then they just kept on winning the ball out of the middle, didn't they? It had the game played in their front half. And when you're chasing for 30 minutes, I know people say, oh, fitness, but you're working a lot harder than when you've got the ball. So
I spoke with a couple of the assistant coaches in the rooms, and they said, "Oh, the run," and because I was like, "Gee, it was pretty impressive." From a bloke like Billy Frampton, who said, I spoke to him in the rooms afterwards, and he said, "I was sorer than I've ever been before in my life after last week's game when he'd rucked for the first time in ages." He goes, "I'm sorer than that this week." He goes, "I don't know how I'm going to spend the entire 5 days in an ice bath before the Adelaide game on Sunday," but it was the run. And I thought, clearly Nick Dacos, exceptional talent and one that I don't think there's been enough superlatives already spread on him. But
well, look, the comment I made, and I'm not the first person to make this, and I won't be the last, it's really, you go back to Chris Judd, his second year. There was a game up at the Gabba. I asked this question in the press conference to Brad Scott. Brad Scott played in that game at the Gabba, I believe, when Judd, I think in his second year, playing against the Brisbane Lions, who were a formidable team in the middle of a three-peat, he kicked 5.5. Now, that was Judd, running around people, leaving them standing. Nick Dacos is a different style of player, not as contested, not that size, not that acceleration, but his ball use and his vision. He makes kicks that other players in the game simply don't make. And one of those was in the last quarter when he kicked on the left to, who was the player? Was it earlier in the game? I'm trying to. He nailed a kick on the left to a player who was Pendlebury. It was in the second quarter. That sort of kick opens the whole game up, and he does it at half back. So, look, Collingwood have also, the other thing I remembered about this, Collingwood, like Dustin Martin at Richmond, have used him in a way that weaponises his talents.
Yeah, they look to get the ball to him every time, don't they?
Well, they do, but McRae also, I think it was last year, he said, well, we just put Nick where we have the problem. And that was when he was in his first year. I mean, you talk about Judd, the only other one I can think of in the same sort of bracket is Joel Selwood for impact so early in their career. But you're talking about two of the greats of the game there, which is already burdening Dacos with that, but it feels like that's the sort of player that he is. And I mean, he'd right now be in the conversation, where he'd be in the leaderboard at the moment for a Brownlow, and that's just phenomenal to think of for a second-year player.
I don't think you can put him ahead of let's not get too carried away. You can't put him ahead of Marcus Bontempelli or Jeremy Cameron in the pecking order of the comp. But it's what he's doing at 20 at weight for age.
But I didn't. And all I'm saying is that in the Brownlow voting right now, the umpires, you could see the games that he's played, and he'd be doing well in those. But Essendon were very impressive, though.
Look, in many ways, the Collingwood comeback is going to obscure the deeper story of this game, which is that the Essendon Footy Club are back on their feet. And they rolled Melbourne. I was at that game very convincingly with a defensive method, and they've got to 28 points in front of Collingwood without Zach Merritt.
And
so
Peter
Essendon
Wright.
are really
Peter
improved.
Wright. I mean,
and Peter Wright, who was their best and fairest last year, and they sorely need against Darcy Moore. So
and they lost Laverty.
And they lost Laverty, and they are the buy-in. I spoke to Dyson Heppel during the week and about the game plan and things that have happened under Brad Scott. And his point, of course, it seems very obvious, but he said, well, it's not about what the plan is. It's about people actually following it and the buy-in from the players.
Well, 6 games in is a pretty decent sample size now, isn't it? It's a quarter of the season, and the frailties that they had last year when they didn't have the ball and couldn't defend the ground, you're not seeing that as much at Essendon. I know it happened last quarter, but I think those circumstances were quite extraordinary in the contested ball numbers and all that. But I think it's time to really start looking at Essendon as a genuine finals contender this year. And I think in a year where there's no standout, there's not going to be a team that wins 19 games. I think this is one of those years where if you make it, you're a chance from ananywhere. I'm not saying that Essendon are going to contend.
I don't think that's true.
I don't think there's a standout this year.
I think that Melbourne and Collingwood and the Brisbane Lions, I think will all make the top 4, barring significant injuries. And I think those teams are clearly very good. And I think Geelong is a potential. I don't see many teams out of that 4 that could actually win the premiership, Andrew. I could see teams make the finals.
No, I disagree. I don't think there's a real. I thought this time 2 years ago Melbourne looked clearly the best team in it. I know Geelong came late last year.
This time last year, Melbourne were the best team in it.
I could see a few cracks.
They were,
but I didn't. I wasn't as taken by Melbourne last year, given the opposition they'd played. They did everything that they were expected to do against that opposition. But then when the better teams came along, they were found out. But like we say, Melbourne and Collingwood this year, they're probably the two
right at the moment.
Two teams to chase. But Melbourne have dropped two already.
Two already, yeah.
And Collingwood probably should have dropped 2. So
probably the mark of them is that they've won these games with significant injuries in one specific area of the field, like their tools. You know, it's an extraordinary story. Billy Frampton, the bloke who was playing basically Sandford all last year, is recruited as a centre half back and finds himself in front of 95,000 people as the first ruck, and half the concept. I mean, Draper beat him on the day. But
he didn't dominate. I think if you look at
he could have. I mean, he kicked 1-3. I think.
Yeah, if Zach Merritt is the biggest loss of any player from either team, Collingwood had a structural problem with tools, but they still had. If you went through the players on each side, Collingwood had the best 6 of the best 7 players in talent on the field, I would say, and over their careers, when you consider Nick Dacos, Pendlebury, Moore, De Goey, just as starters, and probably Braden Maynard and Crisp. They've got the more star quality, but Essendon I thought were very even and got really good defensive efforts. I thought Andy McGrath's game has been underrated. I think his game on Bobby Hill was outstanding.
Oh, he's a perfect matchup for Bobby Hill because he's got the leg speed and he's got the strength and he's a smart player.
Yeah, and Mason Redmond is a serious player.
Yeah, he is.
And he looks like a big occasion player. So I really like what Essendon are doing, and they can only get better.
Yeah, I think on what we've seen so far, I'd be comfortable thinking that they're at the very least, a genuine top 8 contender. I think
a contender to make the top 8?
To make the top 8. I can't see them winning the flag, but I can see them for sure making the 8. But I think
got some good.
It's a wide open one.
Neat players like Langford, few goals, really important player. They were hurt with the injuries. They Setterfield had to be moved, all that sort of thing. But yeah, did you see a parallel even with Anzac Eve, Jake? Melbourne's
very similar in some ways, except that Essendon are a younger team, getting on the rise. I think they'll have setbacks along the way, but they're on a 3-4 year journey with Brad Scott. Whereas I see Richmond as an empire that's that's going to go into a rebuild very soon. And I saw these old champions. It was quite touching to see Dustin Martin, Jack Riewoldt, and Trent Cotchin all battling Father Time and triumphing at times. I thought Riewoldt was just outstanding. I thought Martin statistically played a good game, but there just wasn't that much impact on the game at all.
No.
The statistics were there, but the impact wasn't. It's the opposite of what he used to be. And Trent, of course, is right at the end.
Well, he missed goals. I mean, the goals that Martin missed, you would pencil him in for all of them in years gone by. And I don't know how you quantify that, because it's, or why that is, that with age, that if it's just form, if it's just that, all those soft factors that come into it. But look, the thing is, I thought Hopper and Taranto were terrific. That you've been critical of the recruiting of them.
Well, no, hang on. Let me clarify that. Critical. I think they went one too many. I think to get one
As
of
I
them.
said, you've been critical of
No.
them.
But we've got to be. I will be specific about what I've said and what I haven't said.
Yeah, you've been critical of the decision to get the both of them,
Not to get one of them.
and they were both very good. I thought Hopper was terrific the other night.
Yeah, I agree. But at the end of the year, as you wrote, they're not going to have a draft pick, and that might be a better pick than we expected.
And is Jack Riewoldt better playing as that number one forward? His best form the last two games. Yeah,
I don't know whether week in, week out, at his age, that can be sustained, and whether he can sustain that level of form, despite whether he's the number one target or not. I think that at his age, he probably actually benefits from another big body drawing the heat rather than.
Yeah, but his two best games this season have been without Tom Lynch in there.
But he's also got to play across 23 rounds, and it's.
Oh, I don't think he'd be able to do that at his age.
No, But
Gee, he's a good footballer though.
Smart. Smart players.
He's still got a bit of a leap too. Like one of the timing of the way he times his jump at the ball when he's the players, and he's not that big. He's playing on Stephen May, who's a brute and a bigger man, and brilliant in the air as well. And he's just managed to get a couple of those marks. I just think he's just brilliant.
It's a safe kick for goal as well.
Yeah. Well, that's the other thing. You can convert it that way.
If Richmond had shuffled him off, a contending team without a key forward could have grabbed him. He's one of those guys that.
Well, he's like the Jack Gunston pickup at Brisbane. I
think he's.
Oh, he's a better player, but I'm saying it's the same logic. You go and pick up a guy, you're in the window, but they thought they were in the window, so they're not going to shuffle him off at that point. But
Melbourne.
I really loved the candour of Simon Goodwin after the game, admitting that they were really looking at subbing Van Rooyen out of the game, and then he just pops up with 3 in the last.
And what about that mark?
That mark
was exciting, and I'm sure that he'll be. Well, I would hope he'll be in their best side at the end of the year. And I like the crowd, the ooh noise, which all goes back to Paul Roos all those many years ago. I think he was the first.
But they all
player.
get it now, don't they? Like whether it's Kruger and
Cruiser.
Yeah. He's got that swagger, hasn't he? The big
Wu,
moment.
you would probably get it.
I would have been a cult hero if I played footy.
Hero in your day, Wooey.
But
if you could,
he gets it when he walks in the door at the office.
But he has a swagger. I mean, the big moment doesn't bother him. I mean, when he got those marks, and the game was still on. And he goes back, he enjoys the occasion, he likes the spotlight on him, and he kicks straight. I think he's going to be a really good find for them. Whether he can still be at that level late in the year, first season playing senior footy as a key forward, they'd probably have to manage him during the season. But from what I'm seeing so far, he's a trade up from what they have.
There are players, aren't there, that just, they're natural sort of big stage players. Van Rooyen looks like that. Isaac Rankin just looks like a bloke that's come back and wants to be playing in front of a big crowd. Bobby Hill is doing things at Collingwood now that he wouldn't and wasn't doing at GWS. He likes that big stage.
Well, he's also a 5th year player now.
Yeah, sure. There's that
team as well.
There's that, but well, they were a pretty good team, GWS. Not last year, but
the last 2 or 3. Early doors he was.
But you get what I mean. Like they're the guys that you could see they naturally just love big crowds and aren't cowed by it. And Van Rooyen looks like that. He looks like, I want to be the target. I want to be the guy that jumps.
And Melbourne have got, something over the other contenders this year in 2 words, Max Gawn. Like in the second quarter, I think he took 5 contested marks. In an era where big men just don't take marks, English from the Bulldogs does, but this guy is...
That's true, but it was also, I think, Grundy's best game for Melbourne.
Yep.
And whether that was partly with Gawn coming back, but his third quarter in particular was really impressive. And Hardwick said he had to move Bolter into the ruck that they were getting torched.
I know what you thought, Wu or Gleeson, but I felt that there was a sense of inevitability about this as well, watching the game, with the team with the greater talent in Melbourne. Melbourne playing Richmond playing some brilliant footy, and they don't have Tom Lynch, and they've had a lot of adversity in this season, doing a lot right. They're ageing champions, giving everything, but at the same time, Melbourne having just more firepower, and Max Gawn just ruling the skies.
And burning those shots in the third quarter. I mean, when they had dominance of the game, to not get 2 or 3 goals in front or keep that lead, I think that left them vulnerable. And Melbourne, with their experience, and they were going to have a period where their midfield were going to do something. And I think that's going to be Richmond's lot this year. I think they'll be competitive in most games. I don't think they'll be easy beats. But in most of the games this year, there's been about a 20-30 minute period where they look really hot, and then the rest of the game, they are what they are. They just can't score.
We will get to other games in the round, and particularly after the break, but there were a couple of other issues in footy that have been bubbling along over the weekend. Jack, it now certainly looks like all noises are that the federal government will include funding in the May budget for a stadium in Tasmania, which therefore says there will be a Tasmanian team. The federal government would look pretty stupid if they can't build a stadium down there without the AFL pulling the rug on it. So,
James Massola and Peter Ryan have reported that for the Age, and that's been the expectation. Albo, the Prime Minister, is a Bill, likes to infrastructure, so it's not a massive amount of money if you look at the amounts that have been spent on a lot of other things in the state. Tasmanian state government's giving a lot of it. So the only devil in the details now for Tasmania, the only real hiccups and the really interesting part is going to be what the player rules are around recruiting and probably the money. How much money? Because the presidents of the clubs, I think, have backed it on the proviso that it's not too disruptive to the budget of the competition. And Tasmania have pitched themselves as not being a bottom 4, 5, 6 financial team in terms of AFL funding. So those are probably the two things to look out for now.
Yeah, and it was interesting. We were both in a briefing with the PA last week, and this was the reason. The AFL's wanting them to sign this long-term CBA, new CBA and pay deal, 9-year deal. They're saying, well, how can we do that? You're going to add a team. There's going to be all these changes that are necessary for building this new team with player movement, and will they look at marquee players or whatever they have to do? How do we go and sign up? And I've got sympathy for that position from them because there is too much change. But there was also change. You were over in Adelaide for Gather Round. There was a lot of politicking going on over there with the CEO.
Yep.
Now, just talk us through that. What happened there?
Well, there's really two stories going on in parallel, and they're both overlapping at AFL headquarters and with the clubs. One is the CEO position, where Gillon McLachlan, Andrew Dillon is obviously the favourite to take over from the internal candidates, which includes Travis Auld and Kylie Rogers. The clubs don't think those two are going to get it. It looks like it's a race-off between initially Andrew Dillon and the surprise candidate of Kylie Watson-Wheeler, the Bulldogs president. And there's been a bit of pushback from clubs on that issue. And
you reported last week that
but then there's a secondary story.
Pushed.
Yeah, Goyder pushed up Kylie Watson-Wheeler, and there's been a bit of opposition to that. And I think Andrew Dillon is the firm favourite as it stands. But the timing of this, there's also a feeling from some very senior people around the game that it's a choice between Dillon and Gillon, and that there's still a push from Gillon McLachlan to stay on from Richard Goyder and the commission, and that is a bit of a fly in the ointment because I'm not really sure that that's tenable.
Do you get a sense, either of you, that there's this discontent starting to bubble up about Goyder in particular and the management of certainly this decision on the replacement, but then more broadly, the number of vacancies that haven't been filled at the commission level and the performance overall of the commission under him, that maybe the time is ripe for a change at both positions, CEO and chairman?
Well, I think, certainly there's disquiet. Pete Ryan and myself wrote a story about the commission push with the 3 people that have been pushed up by a coterie of the clubs. And what's interesting about this group of clubs, led by Jeff Brown and Andrew Pridham, is that it's across every state, basically. Andrew Wellington a little less, a little more peripheral to this, but there's the chairman of the Brisbane Lions. But the chairman of the West Coast Eagles, Paul Fitzpatrick, best known as the brother of Mike Fitzpatrick, but he's the chairman of the Eagles. Jeff Brown, who's the president of the most powerful, I would say the most powerful Victorian club. And then, of course, Pridham, who he's very close to.
Shares offices with.
Yep, at the Swans, and who's a financially very acute person, and also David Koch. And they've been the drivers of a push to get commissioners on. They want Andrew Ireland, and as an experienced guy, and as obviously someone with incredible credentials in the game at Sydney and Brisbane, and also Matthew Pavlich is someone who Richard Goyder has enormous admiration for and is a very impressive, I'll say younger. I mean, I don't know what Pav is now. He must be about 40, but certainly a very impressive person on and off the field now. And Lee Matthews, who is as Dermot Brereton once said about Lee Matthews, everyone has got someone that is their predator in the game, but Lee Matthews has no natural predator. He's sort of the top dog in terms of authority. So, but Goyder wants to make the CEO appointment, we're told, before there's the commissioners put on. So there's a lot of politicking going on.
But I think that position in itself creates an opposition to him because he wants to get his way before he brings people in that could potentially roll what his decision is. So he ties the next commission.
Yeah, absolutely. There's been disquiet, and as we said, it wouldn't
call
months
now, though, hasn't it?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. Well, it's 2 years. It's over 2 years since they had the. I think we're into a third year since the commission.
All right, we'll take a break there. We'll come back with some quick questions. Not with quick questions. We'll come back with some listener questions and wrap up some of the other games of the round. Well, welcome back, and possibly, Jake and Andrew, the most salutary game of the weekend was the St Kilda Carlton game. It suggested much about St Kilda and probably just as much about Carlton in their performance. How did you see it through from a Carlton perspective?
I reckon it said more about Carlton. I think Carlton's got, as Michael Voss said, quite a few issues that they can't get right. I mean, the previous week they got smacked in the contest. They fixed that up, and then it was their ball movement that they couldn't correct. And I was late to the party in terms of criticising the ball movement against Adelaide, because that was a game where nothing went right for them. They couldn't win the ball, and they were on the back foot every time they got it. But in this game where they had control of the contested ball, and they still couldn't move it because A, St Kilda were set up very well, and B, I kind of felt like Carlton were a bit afraid of what St Kilda had set up, and instead of backing their players in, they were trying to get the perfect play. And perfect football doesn't win football in 2023. I think you've got to be able to embrace a bit of the chaos in the ball movement. And when you've got Harry Mackay, Charlie Curnow, you've got to back them in to win the contest in the air, or at the very worst, halve it.
Does St Kilda's way of folding numbers back and basically having the old style of flood entice you into believing you have to have the perfect play, though? Because if you go chaos, you're just putting the ball into their hands with greater numbers.
I think they were scared of having the ball go to Wilkie and then rebounding, and then Sinclair rebounding. Yeah. And I don't mind the being methodical at times where you've got to chip the ball around, find the spare player, and then launch. But I think there were plays where they had the kick to pull the trigger and then go in, but they kept on going wide, and then by the end of it, I reckon if you're a Saints defender against Charlie Curnow and Harry Mackay, you would have been laughing, because I reckon there were times when they were seriously under pressure, but they just weren't tested often enough.
I felt this was like a classic boa constrictor Ross Lyon game where people forget the game's changed since Ross Lyon last coached. It's more offensive than it was. The teams move the ball quicker than they did, and he's bought into that with Corey Enright and others on his coaching panel. I think what happened though is that the game got into this situation where Carlton, when they were on top, St Kilda defended very well when Carlton was on top and made it harder for Carlton when Carlton had the run of play. And then when it was almost like Ross Lyon then threw Jack Sinclair onto the ball, and that was like the knockout blow. That's like rope-a-dope, where you come off the ropes and then you start the barrage back, the counter-offensive. And that was what I saw in the third quarter of this game, which was when the game was won, was a counter-offensive by St Kilda with Jack Sinclair particularly going onto the ball with their run. Carlton can get done in the midfield with run. This is a big problem. They didn't have, in hindsight, I really regret my tip. I didn't pay enough attention to selection and the fact that, of course, Adam Sard wasn't playing. I think Sard is a star, and I think Doherty is a very good player. And I think that without that run that comes from behind the ball, Carlton are extremely vulnerable against a lot of teams, probably a dozen teams.
I'd be interested to see. Well, it's moot, but would they have played with pace on the ball against a Ross Lyon? That sort of the numbers back type game. Would they have played it with the pace on the ball, still getting it in deep and and fast?
I think the thing about where you mentioned chaos footy and the need to play it. Richmond played it, Collingwood have played it. I don't think you can play chaos footy though unless you have small forwards.
Yeah,
I think chaos footy depends on speed in front of the ball and tackling in front of the ball, and I don't think Carlton have that equipment. I think Corey Durdin. I got picked up by someone at Carlton. I mentioned that he wasn't up to the level yet. I would calibrate that and say he's not up to being a really good player yet. He's got some promise, but he's a young player.
6 in 5 games. It's not bad.
Yeah, it's not bad. He's a coming player. He's not there yet, is what I was trying to say. I probably used the wrong term. So
Motlop's not quite there yet too, but he's
that's right. I think Motlop's a real talent, and I think that they have to build their defence, their small forward contingent around those two pillars because these guys are great players, particularly Curnow.
Well, they are, but they're not complete players.
No,
and at the moment it's striking. You've got these two, what should be these two great assets, two Coleman medalists, that Carlton is bottom 4 for marks inside 50, and they've got these two great marking players. I was talking to a former player just this morning. He said, well, his view was, and I won't name him because it was just a chat, said he felt Curnow wasn't working hard enough. Like he's playing well, but he could be playing a hell of a lot better. He's not working hard enough on the ground. He's being lazy, but
haven't we learned something about footy that, and I include myself because I was very bullish on Carlton this season, and look, I still hold hope that they'll be a pretty good side in the run home, but they've got to fix some of these things. But this idea that you have two pillar forwards and that delivers you like Hawkins and Cameron, I think footy's changed. I think it's now 5 players in a forward line, and if small forwards kick 100 between them, that's out of 3 players.
But right now they've got
one guy kick 50 and another guy kick 45.
That's true, but they have an enviable pairing that most clubs would like, and they're not getting the bang for the buck out of that pairing at the moment. Maybe it's because of the smalls. It's certainly because Harry Mackay is not kicking straight.
Jack Martin, is there a search party out for him? Where's he?
Surprisingly, he's injured.
Well, he's always injured, and
this
has been a huge issue for the Carlton Footy Club. Is these players they've brought in who just don't play.
But with Mackay, though, I actually think he's having a good season from the point of view of his hands are really strong at the moment. He's taken a lot of marks, but his kicking, I mean, his goal kicking routine's just
where's he
it's
taking
all
his
over
marks
the shop.
to though? It's it's wide and it's up the ground.
He's missed a lot from in front.
Missed a lot, and I know that on the couch spoke about it at length the other on Tuesday night about the fact that he can't. Jonathan Brown and Gary Lyon talking about the fact that he can't settle on which way he wants to kick the ball. 1 minute, one shot's a drop punt, the next is across the body, the next running round, and then he's passing it backwards. Like from different spots, he's not certain at any given point which way he's going to kick the ball.
He should have figured it out. He should have figured it out by now as to how far out he can use the snap. Because I think anything more than 40 metres, your margin for error becomes so small that you end up bellying the ball. And surely, I mean, he's a Coleman medalist. He can figure that out. He should know that. And if he can't figure it out, there should be coaches who tell him.
That segues us perfectly to a listener comment from Angus in Vancouver. Based on what he's seen so far this season, he's declaring the Blues are done for the year. I think that's a bit harsh. The malaise that has hovered over the club since last year's bye continues, and he doesn't see it changing anytime soon.
Good time to be in Vancouver. If you're a Carlton man, stay over there.
That's more pessimistic than I'd be about them.
I still think that core of those 5 or 6, particularly the big 5 players, the 3 key positions, and Cripps and Walsh. And Walsh hasn't hit his straps yet. So let's give Walsh...
He's 2 games in.
He's 2 games in, he's coming off an injury. So let's just see. But they need Sard and they need...
Well, it's that ball movement is the most critical thing, isn't
and
it?
They need speed.
We're dwelling on the forwards, but it's really getting the pace and direction at which you get it.
No, but I also think like they need to find another fast small forward.
Well, they're all injured at the moment. David Cunningham hasn't played for 2 years. Jack Martin sided. And I think they need more from Durden, Motlop,
Fisher.
and Fisher to keep the ball inside 50.
Yeah.
I think's actually, for
Yeah,
a
but
player
he's been out.
who's maligned by the supporter base, I actually think he's quite a smart footballer.
No surprises in some ways with the grand final rematch, but they had a lot of similarities to the grand final itself. But when you looked at the manpower, there was no surprise that the result would fall that way. But it really fell apart for the Swans.
The margin's surprising, though. I don't expect any Sydney team to lose by that much under John Longmire. And for all the outs that they had...
Well, they did in the grand final.
Their midfield, or outside of grand finals, their midfield was still intact. I know Callum Mills had to play...
Callum Mills played full back.
But...
Well, he didn't have to.
Well, they could have kept him in the middle.
McLean.
But it's their bookends. I mean, they were missing. I don't think that's 90 points. I think if you can play a game where you base it around your strength in the midfield, win the midfield, and...
Hang on, who was missing in the forward line?
Franklin, Amadi, Reid.
Amadi, the McCartan brothers in defence.
The McCartan brothers are massive outs.
Yeah.
I think more than the forwards, because I think Lance is not.
Yeah,
Lance is not going to kick goals against Geelong at Kardinia Park.
No, but I think he's...
No, but Amadi was pretty impressive, and he's a younger player and he's coming through. But it's structurally having no one there.
You need a contest.
Yeah.
They didn't have that, but it was the midfield that broke down. They couldn't get the ball in there, and they couldn't.
Warner was
defend.
terrible.
Yeah, had a bad game. Well, I mean, it's watching Sydney play. When they lose, it's their contest game that falls apart, and their midfielders aren't big in terms of modern day big. I mean, you look at
Dangerfield.
Exactly. You look at Warner, he's 185 and 82 kilos. Rowbottom's 186. Callum Mills is probably about the size, 188, but Gordon's 175. Campbell's 181. I mean, they're smaller midfielders, aren't they? And
some of them are quick.
They're quick, but if you can't get it, then you're quick chasing tail, aren't you?
Well, I suppose the thing is, you say, I know they're better players, but you take Hawkins and Cameron out of Geelong's team.
Yeah, but you don't.
No, well,
They're playing.
Sydney has. They don't have their key forwards. Now, they're not key forwards of that calibre, but they don't have the key forwards.
Yeah, the problem is that Jeremy Cameron's 29.
Yeah, and a superstar.
And a superstar. And he's the Lance Franklin of today.
Yeah.
And very similar in many respects. Not quite as powerful as Lance, but as a kick, even better, and a better overhead mark. So, not as good at... I don't think he's got the freaky qualities of
I've got a listener question from Sandy who's got you in there. I don't know if crosshairs. Love the show, but as a Geelong supporter, I feel I must protest against this claim that Jake has made on several occasions, but others have made too, that Geelong enjoys some sort of unfair home ground advantage, at least compared with the other Victorian clubs.
Well, the word I would dispute there is unfair. They've got a home ground. Good on them for having a home ground. But let's not kid ourselves that this isn't an advantage. It's fair. It's an advantage they've earned through being the only club in Victoria that retained its ground and it has a regional identity. And that's more credit to Geelong. Where I probably have had a few snipes is that it's largely come off the taxpayer.
Yeah.
And when you get Geelong supporters and... I've got a few paying out on me for saying Richmond was ahead in a rebuild, which they were and are, except that Geelong won the premiership. So that's not a rebuild. Geelong are better in the now. But that gets, of course, subtleties like that are lost on some people down that way who are drinking a lot of a very, how do I put it? I'm not talking about the people at the club. I'm talking about the fans. Very...
Western District?
Well, no, there's a bit of swagger. There's a bit of swagger about, and success does that. But credit to Geelong, they used Brian Cook and Frank Costa in particular, and Colin Carter after him. They used their connections to government to get that
the marginal seat factor.
And the marginal seat factor. They've leveraged that to get an advantage that is just so big in the competition.
Oh, it's undeniable that they have a home ground advantage. And it's one that other Victorian teams don't have because they have a home ground and other Victorian teams really don't.
Mind you, Sydney were pathetic against them in the grand final and pathetic the other day. And I agree with Wooey that it's not a John Longmire coach teams. That's not what you normally see, and I don't think we'll see it often this season, if at all, again.
This is a good question. I think it was actually just... I think this is from Claire. Is Charlie Cameron the best small forward in the competition? 7 against GWS.
Papley, Cameron, Toby. Do you count Toby Green Is he a small forward?
No,
What is
he's
he?
a hybrid forward.
He's a hybrid.
He's an everything
He's
forward.
an everything forward. To play for my life, provided suspensions didn't come into it, I'd still probably have Toby Green if you count him as a small forward. But I'll accept that he's not a pure one, and I'll say Cameron is actually the best.
I mean, Charlie Cameron, that is the advantage that Brisbane have. They're prepared to go up the line, and they know that they can have the others coming up the ground. Danaher can come up the ground. They've got such a dynamic small that other teams just don't have. Isaac Rankin to be in there for me as well.
I think it's a bit early to put Isaac Rankin in there with Cameron. It's a small sample size. I think he's coming, but he's not there yet.
I'd take Tom Papley still, I think.
Yeah.
Never falls over. Keeps his feet. Good round goal. Can play a little bit in the midfield if needed. And I think he's their main weapon at times, Papley.
Is he? I've posed this question, and the Swans, I think some of the people there got a bit of a chuckle that, is he faster running towards the goal to get a chance or running back in the celebration?
Oh, he's a small forward. Which way do you reckon?
I reckon running back to the celebration. Yeah. With the arm going around in circles. Like
his GPS numbers go up at odd times.
Oh, Charlie's got the motorcycle.
Charlie does the motorcycle, yeah.
And Country Road.
But that goal, you thought it was
yeah, I thought it was deliberate.
You thought it was deliberate.
Did it just bounce off his legs? I don't know. He jumped up for it. I give him the benefit of the doubt based on his history of kicking inventive goals. So, yes, I think he meant it.
Yeah, I'm with you. I think when you do it that often,
then
you think the way he does.
It ceases to be a fluke.
I think one thing, just a specific thing about him, and to a degree Papley, it's not just pace. It's the way in which someone cuts quickly. Like Charlie Cameron doesn't just accelerate quickly. He also he can cut inside a contest towards the goal in a way that the opponent just can't stop. It's hard. It's like it gives him an extra yard of speed.
Yeah, and I think speed is. I'd have him over Papley on the speed alone because I think he puts genuine fear into opponents when they know that he's got that extra ability to just burn them as well as turn them inside out. And Papley can turn them inside out, but he doesn't have the same explosive pace.
Yeah. I suppose we had this conversation 6 days ago, then we're talking up Tom instead of Charlie Cameron.
Absolutely. A listener question from David: will GWS ever move permanently to Canberra? They don't draw flies in. They don't draw flies in Sydney. Okay, there you go. Will, you were previously an SMH-based correspondent covering the Sydney teams. What are your thoughts?
They get good crowds in Canberra. I think it's a strong argument for, but I think they need to stay in Western Sydney, and they need to get further west in Sydney. But what people who don't live in Sydney don't realise is that their home ground in Concord or Sydney Olympic Park, if you actually look at geographically where that is in Sydney, that's a lot further to the CBD than it is out west. I mean, if they really want to get greater Western Sydney, you got to get out to past Parramatta, out to Penrith, out that area. And I think
isn't the problem that if you go out there where the people are, and they have to convert them as well, you lose more of the players because the players want to be players want to live in Manly and
that's the conundrum, isn't it?
No, you're going between fans and
are you trying to
potential plans, not even actual.
Well,
fans.
Are they there to grow the game? I mean, they've been there for 10 years. They've been largely successful in that time, and we haven't really seen a huge material growth in their home crowds. And I'd be thinking if you were out west and you could win 500 new fans every year, then suddenly in that 10 years, that's an extra 5,000 people you got going to the footy. So you've got, instead of crowds of 7,000 or 8,000, you get into 13,000, 14,000, and you're creating a lot more atmosphere. But I just don't think the players, if you're a youngster growing up, you probably don't want to be living out in Parramatta in Sydney.
What about if you're playing out there, but you've got crappy players because they don't want to be there? You're not going to win games.
What about games at the SCG? That's another possibility that's been floated.
Well, that's not exactly Western Sydney, is it?
No, it's not. It's not. It's the second team in Sydney.
If they did that, that'd be an admission that they're not winning over the market that they were brought in to win over.
Yeah, they're just a second Sydney team. They're not a Western. They're not trying to grow into that corridor.
I think it's one of the hardest jobs in footy is to get. It's difficult for the board and the management there to get fans to go to the games.
They only need a small slice, though, of a very large market to make themselves worthwhile.
Well, welcome back. Jake, did Fremantle put too much focus on Rory Lobb last Friday night?
Oh, did they really put too much focus on him? There was a few little incidents.
Well, there was a focus on him, whether it...
I don't think so. I don't think that was high.
It certainly didn't cost the game.
No, the problem was they need to focus on getting the ball in the midfield, where Marcus Bontempelli, Jack McRae, and Adam Treloar.
Adam Treloar was terrific.
Were just rampant and destroyed them. And they were outclassed, Fremantle. They were simply not in the same league as the Bulldogs, and Fremantle have got a lot of thinking to do about where they are.
I think they looked foolish every time Lob was in it and they tried to go after him, and the false bravado and tough guy look, and then when the ball was on the ground to pick it up, they wouldn't do it. They got smashed in the contest. It was a bit like what Damien Hardwick said the week before. You can do all the pushing and shoving, but sometimes you got to pick up the ball, and they didn't do that often enough. And Lob probably they probably did get inside Lob's head, but Lob got inside 23 players' heads. So I think overall Bulldogs would be quite happy with Rory Lobb playing against his former team every week.
Bulldogs are one team that I've kept on the safe list. I don't think they're. I think they've got the more upside than any team that's not going that well. They've got the talent.
Yeah. Listen to the question from Henry. He says the players hate it and coaches hate it, but as a fan, he enjoys the tactical sub-rule. If the AFL were serious about reducing congestion, surely reducing the interchange to more or all substitutions is worthwhile. I'm not sure there.
2 subs?
Yeah, 2 subs. Well, that sort of starts to become the soccer Premier League style of or soccer style of no interchange. You just, once you're off, you stay off, which I don't think we're going to get to. No, I don't. I like the tackles. I like abandoning the charade of, he's injured and may not play next week, so therefore, that's the only basis on which you take someone out. I think having one player that comes.
Well, it was interesting on Anzac Day,
non-returning,
that Nathan Kruger was picked, and he clearly, in fairness to Nathan Kruger, I mean, his touch wasn't
horrendous.
Great. It was horrendous, really. But he was picked on really no preparation, so he hadn't played the games and he wasn't ready. And they had Will Kelly there, who ended up playing on the wing, who's been playing in the VFL, but who was, I guess, an emergency tall. If you sort of looked at it, he could play theoretically in a key position.
But he is a good runner. I think he runs 6-minute 2Ks, so he can run, and so he was on that. 6'4", yeah. So
it's a trade up though from last year where we had. I think teams were disadvantaged actually if they didn't have an injury and the other team had an injury, because they would end up with they could pull a fit player onto the ground, whereas if you had the team that stayed fit, you were actually penalised for it by not being able to replenish.
But I reckon they've got to about the right balance now, where with the interchange, it doesn't feel like it was that period where there was just a constant, revolving door on the interchange bench, and it was just spinning and players were coming on and off constantly. It feels more about the right balance, and I do like that the tactical sub. A listener question from Andrew: will the AFL play the grand final as a night fixture at 7:15 p.m. Eastern Standard Time? The broadcast ratings support that time slot.
No,
Andrew,
no, they won't. Just one other question I've got here from also another Andrew, which is, should Hawthorn supporters be happy with they've had these strong performances, such as the loss to Adelaide, but that they retain pole position in the draft by not winning those games?
Yes.
Yes, only are they the sort of losses that can kick the guts out of your season too? That you fight hard, you're in a position to win games and you just fall short. Now,
that was a good performance.
It was a good performance in Tassie, and
nutted by incredible goal from the boundary.
Oh, great goal
by
Darcy Fogarty.
Darcy Fogarty, who's
become a genuine player.
Yep.
Like the start of last year, I think he went 5 games without a goal, and he looked to me like a complete bust. And that he just looked heavy. He looked like he was a straight line runner that couldn't get the ball below his knees. Now he's become he's far more nimble. He's still that power marking player, but he kicks so beautifully too. He's now a target for it, and he's a genuinely good player.
They wanted him to attack the ball with a bit more vigour, I think, in the end last year, and he's certainly doing that now. I mean, if I was a defender, I'd be afraid playing on him, given what he could do with the ball and make you look silly. He's so dangerous, and I wouldn't want to be the person standing in front of him either, trying to be that third man.
Coming back to the question, it's absolutely right, because it is. If you're in Hawthorn's position now of naked rebuild,
Well, it's been naked.
aggressive
It's been
rebuild.
naked for 2 or 3 years.
That you want to be competitive and not win. You want.
Well,
the
they're in
first
a.
pick.
It seems like they're in a contest with the West Coast Eagles at the moment. Now, West Coast have got an incredible number of injuries. Have had over. God, it seems like years. They just injured all the time. But West Coast are struggling to win games as well. And so is Harley Reid, I don't know whether he's really a standout or not.
He is, from what I've told.
Well, we hear this and then someone else is better. It's always an interesting conversation, but they're going to be down there. But
Would you rather be Hawthorn or North Melbourne with their rebuild at the moment? Because I think Hawthorn are actually playing a much younger team than North.
Yep.
And you can argue that they're getting better results. I mean, I think Hawthorn will probably lose more games by bigger margins this year, but I think there'll be games against better teams which they'll be in for a lot longer than North.
Well, the question is the same with West Coast. I know there are injuries, but there's still a lot of old players at West Coast, and I get the sense they're going to go down further before they come back up again.
There's now this debate, isn't there, about how you do that rebuild.
Yeah. Final listener question, this one from Richard. He's sick of being told that gambling money is needed to fund grassroots sports clubs, as if and at what cost. No one is saying to ban gambling on footy, just get rid of the contentious advertising. I think we all would probably agree with that.
Well, I think there's going to be limits. I'm not sure it's get rid of. It's more what people don't like being bombarded. I think that's probably the starting point.
Yeah.
The bombardment of ads it has upset a lot of fans, and there's surveys and various things that they don't like the proliferation of them, which has been notable over the last decade.
Yeah, the ones I don't like is the pushing of the exotic bets, because I think that sort of stuff just changes the way you consume the game. You're barracking for a bloke to get 27.
Don't fantasy footy teams do that as well?
Yeah, they do.
I was sitting next to someone at the footy a couple of weeks ago, and they had their betting app up and actively supporting against their team
for a bet.
So that their bloke could get
case
a goal.
in point.
How old was the person?
Oh, they were in the 20s, I reckon.
That is all we have time for today. Thanks for both of you for joining us, and thanks also to Channel 7 and Fox Footy for the audio we've used in this episode. If you'd like to get in touch with us, you can do so via email, realfootypod@theage.com.au. Don't forget to subscribe, rate and review wherever you get your podcasts, and join us on Friday for the Round 7 edition of our Expert Tips podcast. Thanks for listening, and we'll catch you then.